Imagine for a second being completely stripped of your phone, sunlight, and your entire sense of freedom. Then you're locked inside a blindingly stark white room. Oh, and you're trapped in there with a complete stranger. It sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, today we're diving deep into an absolutely fascinating social experiment that pushed human endurance, temptation, and trust to their absolute limits. We're going to unpack the sheer psychological weight of this challenge, mapping out exactly what happens when you strip away everyday comforts and replace them with a pressure cooker of total isolation.
Okay, so let's immediately establish the massive stakes on the line here. $500,000. That's the vault of cash sitting right outside the room. If our two strangers, Susie and Bailey, could just endure 100 days inside the cube, they'd split that $500,000 evenly. But of course, there was a massive catch. If either one of them crossed the red line and left before the 100 days were up, they both got absolutely nothing. So one person's breaking point could completely ruin the payout for the other.
I really want to challenge all the armchair psychologists out there right now. Could you do it? I mean, it's so easy for us to sit back and think, sure, yeah, I just sleep for 3 months and count the money. But as we're about to see, the human brain simply is not wired to handle absolute sensory deprivation and forced cohabitation without starting to fray at the edges pretty quickly.
Right from day one, this isolation chamber was essentially a psychological torture device dressed up as a modern white cube. They had absolutely zero contact with the outside world. No clocks, no windows. They were given enough food for 100 days, but it was just identical canned chicken and beef over and over and over again. And worse, the lights were kept blindingly bright, which disrupted their circadian rhythm so badly that they accidentally woke up and started their second day at 2:37 in the morning.
As you can imagine, mind-numbing boredom set in fast. To survive those early days, they resorted to chaotic lengths just for some basic entertainment. They had to construct crude physical shields out of random materials just to hide their eyes from the beaming lights. By day 4, they were literally ripping pages out of their journals to make a functional deck of paper playing cards. By day 5, they were creating fake sign-in sheets to trick the camera crew into revealing the current date. And by day 7, all logic went out the window. Bailey was literally just whipping canned pork at the walls for fun.
But the creators of this experiment didn't just lock the door and leave them alone. No, they initiated a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every 10 days, they offered an escalating series of temptations. On day 10, they were offered a private chef for $50,000 out of their prize money. They stayed strong and said no. On day 20, the offer was luxury smart beds and the ability to finally turn off those blinding lights for another $50,000. Astoundingly, they declined again. But by day 30, the fatigue was real. They finally caved, dropping 10 grand for a coffee machine and the Harry Potter book collection.
The mental wall they hit at this point was massive. Susie actually said, "I think that we're hitting a point where boredom is like at an all-time high." And that perfectly captures the grueling middle stretch of this experiment. It got so incredibly bad that when Hurricane Idalia knocked out their power on day 34, they were practically relieved when the lights came back on. The desperation for any kind of stimuli was so intense that by day 40, they stripped a wire with a knife, jammed it into a wall, and built a makeshift antenna just to pick up a single, fuzzy digital channel showing race cars. Suddenly, two people who couldn't care less about racing were completely glued to the screen.
As they crossed the halfway mark on day 50, the emotional weight of the isolation really began to crush them. The organizers came in and offered them a brief visit with their parents for $20,000. Now, from a purely financial standpoint, this is a terrible deal. But psychologically, it was pure survival. Susie's mother was celebrating a birthday, and the emotional toll of the cube finally overpowered their financial discipline. They parted with 20 grand just to hug their parents for 10 brief minutes and share a slice of birthday cake.
Now, I have another question for you. Would you pay $50,000 of your hard-earned prize money for a giant, locked mystery box? On day 60, this exact box was wheeled right into the middle of the cube. Bailey actually wanted to risk it, but Susie's rational fear took over. She figured the organizers were just trying to trick them into overpaying for something entirely worthless. So playing it safe, they definitively declined the offer. Well, the organizers then opened the box to reveal exactly what they had missed. Inside was $50,000 in cash, meaning the box literally would have paid for itself entirely, plus the keys to 2 brand new Teslas. It was a completely free, massive upgrade that they just rejected out of sheer paranoia. It was a missed opportunity of epic proportions, and honestly, it completely broke their resolve.
The regret in that room was instant, and it was toxic. Susie openly admitted, "I actually won't be able to sleep. I'm actually feeling sick right now."
The contrast principle of behavioral psychology worked totally against them here. By playing it safe, they had lost their absolute dream prize. And for 9 consecutive days, the intense, gnawing regret of missing out on those Teslas entirely consumed the energy in the room. They felt completely and utterly defeated.
Now, what's really fascinating about this next part is how perfectly it captures human psychology overcorrecting. On day 70, the organizers wheeled in every single luxury item they had previously rejected, plus a brand new mystery box, and asked them to submit a blind bid. Driven entirely by the intense fear of missing out from that whole Tesla incident, they completely panicked. They wanted to make absolutely sure they didn't lose out again, so they threw down a massive blind bid of $100,101. They won the bid, sure, but they ended up overpaying by $30,000.
But, for a brief moment, it actually felt worth it. They basically bought a massive rush of dopamine, completely transforming their stark, miserable white room into a luxury vacation suite. They got 2 $30,000 smart beds, a private chef delivering hot chicken Alfredo, pretty much every movie you'd find in a Walmart aisle, spices, coffee, and that new mystery box. It ironically contained 2 kid-sized, motorized toy Teslas. They were absolutely elated.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates one of the most fascinating paradoxes of this entire experiment. During their Spartan living phase, when they had nothing, they were actually united. They bonded over the shared trauma of the Stark Cube. But once they brought luxury living into the equation, it ironically accelerated their interpersonal friction. The introduction of comforts didn't make them better roommates, it made them hyper-aware of each other's annoying habits. By the time they approached day 99, the cabin fever was absolute, unadulterated chaos. Susie harbored this deep resentment because the hot water tank was tiny and Bailey kept using it all up before she could shower. They were trapped in this maddening 7-day, never-ending game of Monopoly because Susie kept stalling. They would spend 25 minutes completely unable to agree on a single movie to watch. And Bailey, who was apparently just wired to the moon with energy, would have literal energetic raving outbursts at 3 a.m. while Susie hid in the bathroom. They could barely stand the sight of each other.
And that brings us to the absolute peak of the tension, day 100. After months of surviving the blinding lights, the crushing boredom, the intense regret, and ultimately, each other, the doors finally open. But instead of letting them out, the organizers hand them the exact same blindfolds they wore on day 1. A final twist was waiting for them before they could claim a single dime of their remaining prize money.
So, let's look at how this builds into the ultimate game theory test. The blindfolds were removed and they were presented with a classic prisoner's dilemma. If you're not familiar, this is a paradox where 2 individuals acting in their own self-interest can basically destroy everything for both of them. After 100 days of shared trauma, followed by recent intense annoyance with each other, they were given 2 buttons, split or steal. The stakes were laid out ruthlessly clearly. If they both chose split, they would divide the remaining $360,000 evenly. But if one person chose steal and the other chose split, the stealer would take the entire pot. And the most terrifying outcome of all, if they both acted selfishly and pressed steal, they would both walk away with absolutely nothing. Imagine the sheer terror of having to trust the annoying roommate you've been trapped with for months, with hundreds of thousands of dollars, knowing they could wipe you out entirely with the simple push of a button. To make it even more intense, the organizers isolated them with noise-canceling headphones to make their final decisions. The agonizing final seconds captured the tension perfectly. As the host put it, if both of them press the steal button, they literally spend 100 days in this room together for absolutely nothing. Bailey actually openly debated stealing. He reasoned that $180,000 was great, sure, but taking the full $360,000? That was life-changing. He was genuinely, deeply tempted to betray Susie to secure the bag.
The countdown hit 0. They locked in their votes. If the room turned red, someone had betrayed the other. But instead, the room turned green. So the really crucial point here is that despite all the crippling cabin fever, the annoying habits, the cold showers, and the sheer overwhelming greed staring them right in the face, they honored their shared struggle. They both pressed split, and they walked out of those doors as very rich survivors.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply personal question to think about. If you spent 100 days building trust in a psychological pressure cooker, dealing with a total stranger's worst habits, only to be tempted by absolute, life-changing greed right at the finish line, what would you choose? Would you honor the bond you built, or would you take the money and run? Really think about it. Thanks for joining me to unpack this fascinating psychological test and keep asking the hard questions.